person in long-term recovery. And what that means to me is that I hasn't had to put a needle in my arm since December 18th of 2015. Today, because of recovery, my life looks totally different. Today, I have a loving partner. I have kids that live with me. I have a car, a driver's license, and I pay insurance on it. Yeah, a big deal. I am a homeowner, and for a couple years, I was a foster parent, and I vote. Yeah, it's a big deal. And so these are all very important things to me in my journey in recovery and what it looks like today. And that is what recovery means to me, right? You know what I mean? And so today I'm going to give a little presentation, talk a little bit about how the system or things are perceived within the recovery ecosystem, right? You know what I mean? In relation to you, your journey, the resources that you have, and piggyback a little bit off what Jason was talking about yesterday. What was that thing? Oxytocin? Oxytocin? Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to steal that. All my presentations from here on out are going to mention oxytocin. Yeah. But he was talking about that connection piece, right? You know what I mean? When we gather, the things that happen, right? So the name of this presentation is called Eagle Feather, right? So, and I thought I was clever when I was making this because I was like, yeah, if we stick together, you know what I mean? Like, we'll all be an eagle, right? You know what I mean? And that is what recovery is. We need to work together. No matter the demographic or where you come from or your background or whatever it is where you come, we are each an eagle feather. And when we come together, it is powerful. Like when we come here today, what we're doing here, up here in Red Lake is powerful. What Red Lake's Warrior Down program that's doing up here in Red Lake with their peers is powerful, right? Who's heard of peer support? Almost everybody? Yeah. Oh, go us, yeah. So, yeah. And so, my name is Colin. I work for a company called Pathfinder, and I'm the director of tribal development. Now, me shooting up, getting out of prison, never thought I would ever have a position that said director on it. You know what I mean? Which is wild to me. But yet, here we are. So, I like to start off by going dun, 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 dun. In a time not so far away, right? We had this cataclysmic, traumatizing event that happened, right? And I'm going to mention this thing called historical trauma. These things, there's been this buzzword, and we're going to talk about epigenetics. We're going to talk about all of this stuff and how it relates to today, right? But this cataclysmic, traumatizing event, which you heard a little bit about last night, you know what I mean? And how does that perpetuate and show up today? One of the things that happened, this system or this event was built on exploitation, exclusion, that created a loss of connection, and this thing called historical trauma, right? When we're looking at the history of people like me, or even, so I was really angry when I was learning about all of this stuff early in my recovery. And one of my mentors, when I was learning about historical trauma and I was getting angry and thinking about all the injustices and this and that, and I was like confused about how can people do this? How can people do this? How can Western settlers do this to an entire race of people? And I was angry about it, learning about it. And my mentor said to me, think about the historical trauma that was going on in England prior to contact here. The wars, the fighting for the crown, the Black Plague, all of these things that were happening in Europe that you hear about during the Middle Ages, right? And it's just creating all of this historical trauma over and over and over again. So when they showed up on the shores, they're bringing all of that historical trauma with them to our shores, right? And thinking about that in terms of historical trauma, because I was only thinking about my people. How can you do this to my people? I wasn't thinking of the broader perspective of historical trauma that is globally, right? You know what I mean? And so these systems that came in, right, they affected us, right? And so what this did is it shattered the social fabrics that existed within tribal nations, right? And it was a breakdown of this family support structure when they took the kids away, right? When they took the kids away and put them into boarding schools, right? You know what I mean? Grandparents didn't have that connection to their grandbabies, couldn't pass down these teachings, and that social safety net that was around women and children was shattered. Right? That was how we protected our women and children, right? The most vulnerable of us, right? And so this breakdown of this family structure, today, how it shows up with domestic violence. If you look at some of the data that exists within tribal communities, domestic violence is very high. Out-of-home placement, our kids that are in foster care, is very high, right? Intergenerational trauma that gets passed down is very high. Right? And there's this thing about when the systems of exclusion, there's a saying that says, the best thing that an oppressor could do is take their hand off, and why would they do that to themselves? Right? Keeping these exclusionary and systems involved that keep perpetuating, and why would they do that to each other? Why would they keep hitting themselves? Why would they abuse their women like this? Why would they allow their kids to be in out-of-home placement? Why, you know what I mean? Like all of these things that are happening within tribal communities, and people see this and they're like, why would they do this to themselves, right? You know what I mean? But not knowing where the root of some of this stuff came from, right? So... And so there was this stigma associated with being Native, right? It was the system excluded us, so we feel like we are not a part of the system or society. And what is that? How do you speak to yourself for that? I remember this thing called internalized oppression, and how that showed up for me was the last time that I was in prison. They do this thing called stand-up count. You hear the buzzer, you got to grab your ID, and you got to stand by the door, and all the guards go around and they count, make sure everybody's in there. And I had a show that came on at 8 o'clock at night while I was in prison, and count was at 8:15. And so I would get all comfortable, make my little ramens, cut up my little sausage, put it in there, microwave it, maybe put some honey in it, and, some chili, whatever. And I would get ready, right? I'm like, ooh, my show is coming on, right? You know what I mean? And so I sit down and I would start watching my show, and then that buzzer would go off. That buzzer would go off and it fucking would piss me off. I'm like, fuck, I can't even watch my own fucking show. Fuck this place. Fuck this. And I was angry, right? I was getting angry that I couldn't sit and watch my show, and I had to stand up. And I remember I started talking to myself in that moment, like, get used to this shit. I was telling myself, get used to fucking prison, because I am going to be in and out of prison my whole life. This is all I'm ever going to amount to. I better get used to this shit. Me talking to myself like that is internalized oppression from a system that tells me this is what I deserve, right? A system that wasn't designed for me, right? And when I feel like I'm not part of it, then all this other stuff articulates to myself where I'm not good enough. This is all I deserve. This is all, you know what I mean? This is internalized oppression that I was going through, and I didn't know it then. But at the time when I was telling myself, get used to this. Get used to this. And I remember thinking, I'm going to be in and out of prison my whole life. Get used to this. Who am I to complain about my circumstances? This is all I'm ever going to be and all I'm ever going to do, right? That's internalized oppression, right? Racism and discrimination. So the best way that I can explain this to people is, okay, how many people in here are left-handed? Right? So, is it hard for you to find a left-handed scissors? Yes. It is a fucking issue to fucking cut a piece of paper because you don't have the correct. And so, like, let's say these left-handed people are complaining about, I can't find a fucking scissors. These scissors are all fucked up. And me, a right-handed person, what are you talking about, bro? There's nothing wrong with these scissors. You know what I mean? I don't see nothing wrong with these scissors. Why are you complaining about these scissors? That's because I am benefiting from these right-handed scissors. So who are you to complain about the scissors, bro? They work perfectly.
All kitchen knives too.
Yeah. Oh my, on that one side where you could, yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, but that is a good example of racism and discrimination, because even though you don't fucking understand it or see it, doesn't mean that you are a part of it, right? So when you hear people of color complaining about racism, this or that, whatever, like, I don't understand it. I don't see what the big deal is. They just need to get a right-handed scissors. You know what I mean? That is the system versus marginalization, right? The individuals with the left-handed scissors, right? That is discrimination and racism. It is the best way I can explain it to you guys, so that way you can understand it. When people are talking about their injustices or their experiences with the scissors, and I don't understand it, and I'm thinking there's nothing wrong with it. You know what I mean? And understanding, okay, you know what I mean? Fuck, left-handed scissors, right? You know what I mean? It makes sense now, doesn't it? Right? And so this left-handed scissors is what I'm talking about in terms of the system that we operate in predominant society, right? Some people need left-handed fucking scissors. You know what I mean? Some people's treatment, they may need a fucking left-handed treatment, right? People like me, an indigenous person from Mille Lacs, I needed a left-handed scissors. And complaining about this, and I'm saying all of this stuff and be like, bro, you just don't want it bad enough. Why aren't you recovering? You just might not want it bad enough. You just got to hit bottom and work harder. You know what I mean? Why don't you just use your right hand? Fuck. You know what I mean? Am I making sense? Do you guys think I'm full of shit too? Yeah. But that is what I am talking about, right? So these systems of exclusion, right? And what does that tell the left-handed person? The system is not designed for you. You are somehow weird and you are different. You just need to conform to us right-handed folks, right? You know what I mean? So this is what I mean when I'm talking about systems of exclusion, right? You know what I mean? Now let's talk about exploitation. Exploitation, the system was built on exploitation, right? What happened with when people showed up and there was contact, they seen all of this land, right? You know what I mean? And this place here was discovered, right? You know what I mean? It was just, never mind that there was people here, you know, hundreds of millions of Native Americans here, but yet it is discovered, right? You know what I mean? Somehow we were lost. We were lost individuals. So that is the system saying we are not a part of the system, right? That is exclusion, right? Just the simple act of saying it was discovered, right? Says that, oh, it was discovered for this system, right? You know what I mean? And that's what I mean by exploitation and exclusion, right? So how does this show up today with the most vulnerable individuals within our community, right? Who has heard of missing and murdered Indigenous women, right? These are the most vulnerable individuals in our communities, is our women and our children, right? And we look at this system today, and why is there so many kids in out-of-home placement? Why is there so many women missing and murdered? Why would natives do this to themselves? Right? So, and these systems still perpetuate themselves today, and there's a lot of energy and trauma around these topics, right? When we deal with family members, or I know what it feels like when, as a male, I guess can't really say, but like one of the things that I've seen in my journey of recovery is the amount of extra trauma and energy that happens when our sisters lose their kids. So not only are they feeling the normal effects of having to lose their kids, but they're feeling all of their ancestors in their DNA, remembering their kids being taken and put into boarding schools. Right? So it's all this confounded stuff. So not only are you feeling this singular event, but you're feeling generations of the same thing happening, right? So it just appears bigger than what it is, right? You know what I mean? And who has heard of this thing called epigenetics? Epigenetics? What is epigenetics, bro?
Doc. You can give the better clinical stuff.
Well, epi just means above, so it's alteration of the genetics by other mechanisms, and they've thought about different molecular paths for it, but there's certain things that turn on and off DNA that are still being investigated but are real. So.
Yeah, so they did this experiment on these little mice. And so they did these little experiment on mice. They would spray a cherry smell into this cage of mice and then electrocute the bottom, right? So then these mice associated that smell with the pain of electrocution. Now, the weird thing that happened is their offspring, when they had babies, their nose was a little bit more developed to detect this smell, but also when they smelt that cherry smell, these little babies would freak out. Their heart rates would go up and they'd be like, what the fuck is, you know what I mean? They're starting to panic. And even though they have not experienced that electrocution, right? You know what I mean? When something, but yet they still smelled that cherry smell and panicked, right? The same thing happens when our kids get taken, you know what I mean, from their mothers, right? They're smelling that cherry smell. That is historical trauma. That is epigenetics. That is stuff being passed down through our DNA, right? So let's see. So there was the exploitation of Native women and children, right? That happened with our old history that is still being perpetuated today. And then let's talk about the Allotment Act, right? The lands of all of our people that got through the Allotment Act and taxes and all this other stuff where they just took large swaths of land, like the Black Hills and all of these different things from a people that grew up there, that knew there, that his lands knew them, they knew them and the lands knew them, right? And so, and culture, right? Assimilation practices, where they put you into boarding schools and they said, you need to speak language, you need to speak English, you know what I mean? Here is our God, here is our things. These are all assimilation practices, right? And even there's this thing now that I'm hearing people talk about called religious trauma, right? You know what I mean? And I notice that sometimes when I talk to some of the old school elders in my community, when it comes to Christianity, holy fuck. They'll dig in and they're ready to fight, right? You know what I mean? Because of this religious trauma that experienced. And maybe that the word around religion is creating that cherry smell for them, right? You know what I mean? Or maybe they have firsthand experience of boarding school and Christianity and things like that from a priest or whatever, right? So, and then I think it was 1878, the American Indian Reservation Act of 1978 gave tribes the autonomy to create governments within their own things. I don't know why I put that in there. Yep. So then there was legal and political disenfranchisement, right? So we were not even citizens of the United States until 1924. Native Americans, we couldn't even vote. And then even after 1924, there were stipulations. If you wanted to vote, you had to own land, or you had to read, or you had to do all this different, you know what I mean? So all of these systems that, and last night, what was the Freedom of Religious Act of 1978? Yeah, what's up?
Brother, can I give you a little...
Yeah.
So you ever heard of John Trudell?
Yep.
Man, he talks about this stuff and like the birth of this country they call democracy.
Yep.
So in this system that
Yep.
People of color, like black people, they couldn't vote because they were slaves.
Yep.
Women couldn't vote because they're subservient to
Yep,
men
yep.
based on their religion and,
Yep.
you know, and all that stuff. Indians couldn't vote because we weren't considered human beings.
Yep. We were like 2/3 or something.
So they say that's when, you know, you're talking about these systems, that's when like a lot of these systems of classism, socialism, racism, sexism, they were all born in this country, you know, with the birth of this country.
Yeah, right. So we're talking about systems of exclusion and exploitation, right? And how this system has grown over the past and the impacts of it, right? And believe me, there's a point to this. I'm going to get to some good shit that'll make you guys be all like, rah, you know what I mean? But I'm just laying the foundation, right? You know what I mean? And anybody that works within this field or helping a lot of our relatives, when it comes to if there is a chip case, right? And I'm working with a relative and there's a chips case, I understand that there's all this other stuff going on, right? You know what I mean? And there's this thing called trauma-informed care, right? The more you understand a lot of this stuff on a larger level, that allows you to be more compassionate to the person that's in front of you when you're helping our relatives, right? So, legal and political disenfranchisement, right? So, who remembers Deb Haaland? Does anybody in here know Deb Haaland? Besides Jason. Who is Deb Haaland?
She was attorney, state. She's something in government. I can't remember what she is.
Yeah, okay, so throughout history, the Bureau of Indian Affairs originally started in the War Department, right? That is how they dealt with natives, was under the War Department. And the Secretary of Interior was ahead of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, right? And any kind of federal and trust land. So the Secretary of Interior was under the War Department, and they dealt with the quote-unquote Indian problem, right? You know what I mean? Because all these uprising things that were going on with tribes around that time fighting back, the Secretary of Interior was in charge of handling the Indian problem, right? And so throughout history, up until 2016, it is always, and if you look at tribes and the way that they're structured, there is a clause, and most of the tribes removed them, but there was a clause in tribal government that said if you wanted to change the laws of your tribe, you needed approval from the Secretary of Interior. If you wanted to amend your constitution for the way the tribes operate or structured, you needed approval from the Secretary of Interior. So even though we are governing ourselves, we still needed approval from the Secretary of Interior, right? Majority of the tribes removed that from their constitution or clauses, right? You know what I mean? But some still have that. So the Secretary of Interior had a lot of power over reservations, tribes, and its people. And it was originally under the War Department, but then the War Department had shifted and it became all federal and trust lands are now under the Secretary of Interior. But in 2016, Deb Haaland was appointed the Secretary of Interior, which was a big fucking deal. The Secretary of Interior is 8th in line to the presidency. That meant if somehow if whatever happened, if there was 7 people, the president, the vice president, the house person, whatever, if there was 7 people that died, that's what individual would be. So this was the 8th most powerful position in the United States, and it was this native woman that got appointed to that time, and that was the first time a native was appointed to that position. That is a big fucking deal. It was a big deal. When she got appointed to it, it was a big deal for me watching it. I got in my little feelers watching it because I understand the context of history and what that meant to having representation at that table, right? So when we're talking about lack of representation, I want to stress to you guys how important representation matters, right? So I'm currently the vice chair of the Governor's Advisory Board on Substance Use Disorder. Right? Big fucking cushy fucking thing, whatever, you know what I mean? I got appointed. I got to shake the fucking governor's hand. So, you know what I mean? It was a thing, right? And so, yeah. But let me say this, right? Back to, I'm going to use some stigmatizing language here about how I used to perceive myself. I am just a junkie inmate 218769. It's not as old as the OID number as Jason, but it's a little up there. Yeah. 2006. But anyway, so that's how I perceive. I'm just junkie inmate 218769, and I am just from the res, right? What could I contribute or bring to this fucking table here, right? You know what I mean? And so when they appointed me to this, and they appointed me as vice chair, I noticed the one thing that I am always bringing to the table is the disparities and the pain that is felt within my people, right? Native Americans are dying at a 10 times rate than our white counterpart from overdoses, right? You know what I mean? And that's felt by me personally. And so when I'm sitting on these big board meetings and there's all these nonprofits and organizations shaking their tin cups about how they want to solve the problem, I say, hold up. My people are dying at a 10 times rate. You know what I mean? Yes, what you're talking about may help and benefit the state, but how does that alleviate the 10%, the 10 times rate, right? And so me voicing that, and you would be surprised about how often I bring that shit up in these meetings, because these are brilliant people and they're thinking about systems and how to make systems changes, right? But I am ringing this bell about, hey, my people are still dying at a rate 10 times more than anybody else, right? And so I bring that up almost every fucking board meeting that we're there, and it changes the room and it shifts. Okay, right? So I'm constantly pointing at this problem, right? And if I wasn't there, them numbers, they wouldn't be doing anything. So one of the things that we did when I first got to the board was, okay, we're looking at this overdose data, we're looking at the rates and this and that. One of the things that we really pushed was MOUD in jails. Like allowing individuals when they leave or when they're in jail to have access to medication. Right? And that's big, right? That was 2 years ago that we fucking did that, right? You know what I mean? So, and another thing that I'm working at on the board is background checks, right? We want people with lived experience with substance use disorder, but we don't want too much lived experience, right? You know what I mean? You know? So that is what I'm bringing to the table is my perspective from everything that I see, right? You know what I mean? And when I go into these rooms with these eggheads and these brilliant people, they don't understand that. Yeah. Like doctors. No, just kidding. No, just kidding. I'm kidding. But that is why representation matters, right? Loss of connection. Who has heard of learned helplessness? What is learned helplessness?
Well, I'll just give an example. So, if you want to see how well an animal, how much strength it has and how much endurance it has, you can put a rat in water and see how long it can swim before it dies, which just means it's run out of energy or gives up. But if you hold it down for a while and then you put it in, its capacity to swim will be greatly diminished and it will die earlier because it just gives up on some level.
It doesn't believe.
Because belief is very important in how we do.
Yeah.
And bad beliefs are important in making people do badly.
Yeah. So who has heard of Pavlov's dogs? Anybody heard? What is it? What have you heard about these dogs, bro?
Basically, they give them the test and stuff. They ring a bell and stuff, and then they'll start salivating and stuff from waiting for the treat to come.
Yeah.
Like when we call dope man, we're running that bathroom like 4 times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this individual did some fucked up shit to dogs, right? You know what I mean? But anyways, so he was doing all these experiments on these dogs, right? And there was a hurricane coming that was going to flood everything, and he didn't have time to get to his house, so he sent his assistant over there. Okay, I'm worried about my dogs. Go and open up all their cages, let them out, because there's a flood coming, right? So there's assistants go there, and they open up all the cages to all of these dogs that have been tortured and experimented on. And even though the water came in and it kept raising with their door open, they just didn't even get out. That is learned helplessness. You see that a lot with survivors of domestic abuse. When you say, why don't you just leave, right? You see this, learned help. And another way to see it, the way that, there's a way that you can induce learned helplessness. There was an experiment done in school where they gave one half of the class easy anagrams like bat, things like that, and they said rearrange these and make another word, right? People would be like tab, or they had the easy ones on this side, and then they had difficult ones on this side. And they said, hey, this shouldn't be easy. They were telling the class, now rearrange these words and rearrange these letters and make another word. And so there was 3 words that each side had. The first, all of them, the first 2 were different. This side was hard, this side was easy. But then they had the same exact word on the third try. And by the time this side got to the 3rd word to try to rearrange it, they had no confidence. They couldn't believe they could do it, right? When this side had easy words, right? And they would say, hey, when you're done, raise your hand. And everybody's watching this side raise their hand about, hey, I figured it out, tab, right? You know what I mean? Rearrange bat to tab, right? And so they're watching this half succeed, this side sitting there. So even when they got to the 3rd exact same word that was the same on both sides, this side of the room couldn't do it, right? That was induced learned helplessness, right? And so how many times do we see individuals in early recovery feel that same way, right? You know what I mean? I know for me, I'm going to tell a quick little story about, for me, I was 1 year into my journey of recovery, and I had just reached a 1-year milestone, BFD. I got a full-time job. I stopped working day labor, got a full-time job. I financed a car, and I got my driver's license all within a week's time of my 1 year. And so the thing that happened to me in that moment was for some reason, I didn't understand it, but I was sad. And I remember I was talking to my mentor at the time, and I was like, man, I worked so hard for all of this different stuff, and all of this hard work is starting to pay off. Why do I feel like shit about it? And he said to me, sometimes when you're so used to failing over and over and over again, you do not know how to succeed. And how many times do we see that with our relatives when they come in your early stages of recovery, that they have that same thought? I can't do this. This is so hard, right? And even for me, early on, filling out a fucking job application was a lot of fucking work. You know what I mean? Sometimes, I remember the first one I filled out, it took me days to fucking do, to get the references, you know what I mean? Like it was a lot of fucking work. You know what I mean? Now I kick out 15-page grants like they ain't shit. But early on, right? You know what I mean? I had this learned helplessness about me, right? I didn't think I could do it. Even in prison, when I'm telling myself, get used to this shit, this is all I'm ever going to fucking be, right? You know what I mean? I'm trying to conform myself to adjust to these things, right? And so that's learned helplessness, violence, substance use disorder, suicide is very prevalent within tribal communities. Just, a year and a half ago, I lost a cousin. She hung herself in front of her youngest boy. You know what I mean? So suicide is prevalent, right? So I'm just talking about some of these issues that we see within our communities, right? Exclusion, right? So prior to the Reservation Business Act, there was 3 different ways tribes defined membership. 1, you were born into it. If you were born into the tribe, you were a tribal member. The other way was if you married into it. If you married to somebody into the tribe, you were a tribal member. The 3rd way they defined tribal membership was when the community recognized you as such. That was how they defined it. Who remembers Little Big Man? Anybody watch Little Big Man? You know what I mean? Or A Man Called Horse? You know, it's an old movie. I'm dating myself. I'm bored. But that was how they defined membership, is when the community recognized you as such, you were a tribal member. Then comes the Reservation Business Act, was like, how would you legally define a tribal member within the legal system that is not designed for us? How would you legally define a tribal member? Blood quantum, right? If you met a certain blood quantum, you were a tribal member, right? And thinking about throughout history, how many times have you heard of tribes just adopting people into the tribe? right? You know what I mean? All the runaway slaves and all of the everything that would leave and come into a tribe, well, all right, you know what I mean? And so these exclusionary systems that were already in place, and now we're starting to adopt them, right? And there was a long time ago, the worst thing that you could do to a tribal member was banish them. That was the ultimate form of punishment that the tribe could bestow on an individual, was banishment, right? And it was reserved for the most worst cases, right? And there was so Jason mentioned this thing called indigenous harm reduction, right? In Mille Lacs, we have these things called drum ceremonies, right? And there is a thing, when you get appointed to this drum, you are appointed to this drum for the rest of your life, no ifs, ands, or buts. Doesn't matter what you go through or whatever it is, when you get appointed to this drum, you're appointed to this drum for the rest of your life. And I think about that all the time because, like, how many times now do we build systems on exclusion where we exclude a lot of people, right? And I advocated against, my tribe was trying to bring back banishment, and I was like, what about if the individual is appointed to the drum? Are we going to banish, or are we going to implement banishment on them and not allow them to come to our ceremony when our ceremony is supposed to have precedence over everything else in our way of life? You know what I mean? What happens then if you know what I mean? Like, which law then do you adhere to in that scenario, right? You know what I mean? And how I view it today is, if we are banishing our relatives, I felt like that. Just me personally, I feel that there's a failure on our tribe to that relative. That's just me, though, right? So these systems of exclusion starting to happen, right? You know what I mean? Okay, so now, this is crazy. That is my coworker right there. So when we're talking about colonization, right? Let me see what I wrote. Colonization is the act or process of settling among established control over the indigenous people of an area, appropriating a place or domain for one's own use, right? So see related concepts. I talk to a lot of organizations that do a lot of work within tribal communities, right? You know what I mean? And I have to tell them to watch out for these things. The savior complex, right? You know what I mean? Oh, look at this data of these natives. I need to save them. You know what I mean? So hero syndrome, Messiah complex, Superman complex, the white knight or the white savior, right? You know what I mean? And so when we're talking about that cherry smell, right? You know what I mean? Of colonization and things. How I know I see it when somebody comes up with a white savior complex, right? That screams of colonization to me, right? You know what I mean? And I'm here to let you guys know right now, where's all your peers out there that are whatever, we do not need anybody to save us, right? Everything that we need already exists within the community. And I'll get into that later here. But, part 2. So that was the groundwork. Dun, 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 dun. So there was this cataclysmic, traumatizing event that happened within indigenous communities, right? Talking about historical trauma, exclusion, exploitation, all of these different things, right? And how did our people respond to that, right? To the darkest areas within history, how did we respond and make it through that? Because we're obviously still here. Right? And what carried us through those darkest times, right? So throughout, there was this fucking badass article. There's few of them that are out there that talking about how natives responded to these darkest times within history. Right? The first one is resilience is embedded within native culture. Right? How do I explain this? So I remember one time I brought both my sisters to a meeting one time. I brought them to a Walleye meeting one time. And this was such a big fucking deal to me that they finally showed up to a meeting. I didn't give a fuck if they were using or not, if they were still high or whatever, they fucking showed up. It was a big deal to me. It was a big momentous day that they actually fucking showed up. I don't care how they showed up, they fucking showed up, right? And I remember before the meeting, I didn't want to fuck it up. So I went out to a tree and I put my tobacco down and I started talking, right? And for whatever reason, I start rambling on and on. And I remember, I don't know why my prayer shifted, but I started talking to my mom. When my mom died when I was 6 months into recovery. And this is maybe a year and a half into my recovery. So it was about a year after my mom died. And my sister showed up to a recovery meeting and I'm fucking talking to my mom and I'm telling her, like, man, they just don't fucking listen. They just need to do what I say and they just whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm talking with my tobacco, talking to my mom like this. And I remember for whatever reason, the thought that came to and my mom like sort of yelled at me a little bit, was like, quit being so fucking hard on them. You know what I mean? And I remember she said, my mom had a certain tone that when she said it, my fucking back straightened up, like, you know what I mean? And she said that to me in that moment and I was like in shock, right? You know what I mean? And so like, there was another experience for me where I was fasting and I was fasting. And I grew up in foster care. Parental rights were terminated when I was 5 years old. Blah, 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 whatever like that. So like family and being a dad and all of that stuff is really difficult for me because I've never had that demonstrated to me. So I'm fasting, I'm out there, and all of a sudden my grandmother shows up. And I could feel her witnessing me going through this ceremony. And I remember I could just feel the joy that she had of me going through this ceremony where she's watching her grandson participate in this ceremony. I could just feel how proud she was watching me, right? Anyways, and I remember I was trying to brag about all my accomplishments. Hey, I'm on the fucking dean's list. I started Sober Squad. I'm helping all these people. I'm fucking me. And all she wanted to know was about her grandbabies and my sons and my nieces and my nephews. She didn't give a fuck about all of my personal accomplishments. She wanted to know how her babies are doing, how her bloodline is doing. And I remember I stopped and I said, Grandma, I'm scared. I'm scared to be a good dad. I'm scared to be a good brother. I'm scared I don't know how to do this and all of this other stuff like that. And the only way that I can explain how I felt in that moment was like there was like a scab on my heart. And it was just like really, and it hurt that's where family was supposed to be. And there was this scab here, and it felt like she was rubbing like some sort of like bear grease or salve or something on it, just so fucking lovingly in that moment on that wound that I had on my heart. And she says, I know you're scared, right? I know you're scared. I know this is difficult, but I love you and I'm right here with you. And next thing you know, I'm in this ceremony fucking crying my eyes out. And I'm fucking just, you know what I mean? Like maybe I was hallucinating because I hadn't had water for 4 days or whatever it was. But anyways, that happened. So when we're talking about that resilience is embedded in our culture, being a parent is fucking hard. You know what I mean? Raising kids is fucking hard, right? You know what I mean? Another one was, okay, when I lost my mother, 6 months into my journey of recovery, I had lost my mother, and my mentor, the same one that told me, you know, when you're failing so much, that same guy that said that, shows up to me. I lost my mother. I'm angry. I'm upset. I don't know which direction I'm going to go in. He said, I'm going to pour water for you tonight in the lodge. Right? So I had literally just lost my mother, and he says, I'll pour water for you tonight in the lodge. And I remember I wanted to be angry at him. I didn't want to go to lodge. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to sit in my shitty diaper and be mean to everybody. You know what I mean? And so when he said, I will pour water for you tonight, I didn't know what to accept. I didn't know what to do. So I said, okay. And I remember that night was the first time I ever sang a song on my own without backing somebody up or somebody singing with it. So I sang this song to my mom in the sweat lodge that night on my own. It was the first time, right? And I remember I'm fucking crying, the voice is cracking, I'm this and that, whatever like that. But when I crawled out of that lodge, having gone through that, singing that song to my mom, it felt like the pain and the grief and the agony of that moment was just a little bit lessened, a little bit, just enough for me to help preparing her and her funeral and sending her off in a good way, right? Picking her casket, her clothes, and all of this, you know what I mean? Finding somebody to do so, you know what I mean? But all of that started in the beginning of that lodge that night after she passed away. And I didn't even want to fucking be in there, right? I wanted to be angry and upset, and my excuse to be an asshole, right? You know what I mean? And so resilience is embedded in our culture, right? That's the whole point of that, right? Attain strength from each other's families, relatives, and tribal communities, right? When we are together, right? Oxytocin. There is resilience when we get together. When we go to AA roundup, or we go to a meeting, or we go to whatever it is, there is resilience attained in that when we get together. Feel oneness with all creation. I lost my youngest sister probably about, I don't know how long ago was it, 2 years ago? Was it 2 years? 2 years ago, I lost my baby sister to substance use. And I remember that night when she passed away, I'm standing outside and I'm smoking a cigarette outside. And for whatever reason that night, there was no clouds in the sky and there was no moon out. I couldn't see the moon, but for whatever reason, the stars just looked crystal clear to me that night. And I'm looking up at the sky, the night sky that night, and I felt so tiny in comparison to the universe in that moment, right? I just lost my baby sister, and all of this stuff. I'm standing outside, and for whatever reason, I felt so small in comparison to the whole universe that night, right? And so for whatever reason, my pain that I felt about my baby sister felt even smaller in comparison to the whole universe, right? So I'm sitting out there, and again, right, you know what I mean? So talking about in terms of resilience, right, what got me through that, right? I felt connected for a brief moment that night, right? Legacy of survival is passed down. How many times do we hear about resiliency and survival of stories that are being told to us over and over and over again, right? They tried to kill us, but we are the seeds that they tried to bury, right? How many times are we told over and over again about these stories of survival and resilience that are embedded, constantly being told to us as we're growing up, right? So these are 4 themes of resilience that happens within tribal communities, right? And so all of these things are still prevalent today, right? You know what I mean? There's still teachings that are going on. There's still sweat lodge. I learned to play moccasin game. We still rock our ribbon shirts and our ribbon skirts, our language, naming ceremonies, funeral ceremonies, fasting camps. There is still all of these things that exist today, right? You know what I mean? Despite everything that it went through, all of these things are still accessible to us today. Right? And some of these, so I notice when I see a kid running around that's maybe like 18, 19, 20 years old on my reservation, and I see him and I don't recognize him, I say, who the fuck is your mom? You know what I mean? I say that today, right? But that is a sign that I come from a matriarchal system, right? I don't ask, who's your dad? Right? You know what I mean? I come from a matriarchal system, so when I see a little fuck running around, I'm like, who is your mom? Right? You know what I mean? Or who's your grandma? Right? That is a sign that I come from a matriarchal system, right? Where grandmothers and mothers are the heads of families, right? Elders still hold a lot of prevalence and power within our communities, right? Drum ceremonies, drum structures, Sundance ceremonies, structures, our Sundance ceremonies and structure are still alive and prevalent today, right? So these things still exist. Oh yeah, I put my sober squad on there. We're dope. But now, throughout history, our people have been advocates. Throughout history, right? If there was a pipeline or whatever it is, all throughout history, you see natives standing up for Mother Earth. All throughout time, like as long as there's been colonization and things that are coming, natives are still standing and advocating for change, right? That's just in us, fighting for what's right. Right? And talking about this, right? Who remembers the American Indian movement? That started down in Minneapolis, right? There was police brutality where they were bringing all of our relatives to the river, beating their ass or whatever like that, right? And natives got together and started to organize, right? Sober squad, right? When I first got into recovery, the work that I did around recovery were from reservation to reservation, right? Advocacy efforts, or any kind of environmental advocacy that has happened throughout history, natives have been there, right? You know what I mean? And so advocacy is not something new to us, right? And so talking in terms of advocacy, I didn't get to format this one here, but there's a sweat lodge there, whatever like that, boo, 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 boo. But social media can be a powerful tool for advocacy. Well, there's a saying I heard somebody say last night was like, I recover loudly so those don't suffer in silence. Yeah. And so I will let you know that is a double-edged sword, though. You know what I mean? There's who have heard of Teddy Roosevelt's The Man in the Arena? Has anybody heard of that saying? You know what I mean? Like the doer of how it's not the critic who counts. Talking about how the doer of deeds could have done them better, or how the strong man stumbles and fails, but he keeps getting up, dusting himself off, trying valiantly over and over and over again, so that way his place is never amongst the timid souls that never did anything, but those who have tried and failed, or tried and have known great defeat, but at times may know victory. Yeah, and their place is not among the timid souls of the critic. So it is not the critic who counts, right? The ones that are out there doing the deed, right? And so like the double-edged sword is sometimes how our people respond when somebody is doing really good in their recovery and they stumble, right? The amount of shame and stigma that we push on people, our own people, when they stumble, right? So not only do they have to deal with the shame and stigma of just having to return to use, now they have to deal with the shame and stigma associated with, hey, I've been screaming recovery for so loud for so long. And then now all of these critics come out of the fucking woodwork, right? So I'm saying that is a double-edged sword associated with this, right? So, but when we push back against all of this stuff, talking about all the different access points to Sweat Lodge, to where we can get ceremonies, where we can go to Wellbriety, AA, NA, whatever it is, anything healthy that happened out there, showing that recovery just doesn't happen in a church basement. Recovery involves getting your kids back. Recovery means getting a driver's license and insurance. Recovery means being a foster parent. Recovery means paying fucking bullshit ass insurance. You know what I mean? Right? So there was this thing that we used to do that they just did on Thursday called smudge walks, right? And I'd like to tell a story about some people, how much that impacted them, right? So imagine hypothetically that you're in a dope house and you feel hopeless, right? You know what I mean? You've been in and out of you've tried recovery a bunch of times, you can't fucking get it, you're using, you don't want to, like, it's just, you're just in this downward spiral and you just like don't know what to fucking do, and you think you don't deserve recovery. You just believe this is all I'm ever going to be. I better get used to this shit, this is all I'm ever going to be, right? And then all of a sudden, you see a group of just greasy-ass natives walking by in front of you. Well, okay, just Betty Greasy walking by in front of you. And you're sitting in this dope house, feeling hopeless, feeling alone and lost, and you see a whole group of people walking by talking about proud to be in recovery, right? Imagine the message that sends to that individual that's feeling hopeless in that moment. That is powerful. Right? You know what I mean? And so, like, I don't think people understand that recovery is contagious. Right? You know what I mean? And so, when we would do these smudge walks and doing all of this stuff like that, right? You know what I mean? How much that... So, here's another one. There was a guy So first Thursday of every month, I used to fucking walk around with a smudge can. I had a coffee can, I poked some holes in it, strapped it to a stick, and I put some smudge in it. And first Thursday of every month in Mille Lacs, when we would get our per cap, I would just stand out in the parking lot, walk around smudging people, right? Fuck, I caught a lot of shit from elders early on in the beginning. But anyways, I'm just out there fucking smudging people down, right? You know what I mean? Because my people are dying. This was 2016 when I first got into recovery. There wasn't no sober squad. There wasn't any kind of recovery. It wasn't fucking cool then, right? You know what I mean? I was just this crazy motherfucker out there smudging people the first Thursday of every month when people got their per caps. And I'm handing out Narcan, and I'm doing all this stuff, right? And I'm fucking just walking around smudging. There was a guy that was sitting in the back of a car one time. He said he recognized me, seen me out there smudging people, and he was thinking to himself, man, I hope he fucking sees me, right? And I'm just out there fucking around, fucking smudging, whatever like that. And I do recognize him. And I fucking walk straight to his fucking door. I'm like, I even opened up his fucking door. I'm like, hey, what's up, bro? Hey, you want some of this? And I gave him some smudge, right? And how much that meant to him in that moment, that the next day he went and got an assessment, got a treatment. He's been in recovery ever since, right? Just that little fucking act, right? Of like, I don't even know the impact of what we're doing. I'm just out here just fucking around. Right? You know what I mean? That small gesture of me recognizing him and running to that fucking door, opening his fucking door up and, hey, bro, get some of this. Right? I wasn't judging him. I wasn't shaming him. I was like, here, bro, get some of this. Right? And then I went back on fucking being all crazy, right? But showing hope and letting people know that we are out here, right? And so building trust with our community is important, right? You know what I mean? No matter where you go from here, whatever part of Minnesota that you branch out and you go back to where you are from or whatever like that, you know what I mean? Like, so somebody was mentioning harm reduction, right? Harm reduction is an invitation to those still suffering to live. Harm reduction is an individual that is still out there suffering to be seen. Harm reduction is the invitation to the individual that's out there still suffering that they matter. Right? Harm reduction is an invitation for them to get into recovery, whether we say it or not. Harm reduction is an invitation to that individual that you deserve life and you matter and you are worthy. Right? That's all harm reduction is. And so when I was out there, right, and that's how you establish trust. That's how you establish trust. So many times we in recovery, we are told what we should do. Right? Or we think we're excluded because I'm a junkie and I'm an inmate and I'm a this and I'm a whatever, right? You know what I mean? And harm reduction is an invitation to participate. Right? You know what I mean? And so like, oh, that was kind of dope. I'm going to have to write that one down. Part 3, The Last Jedi. I'm not talking about myself. All right, so now we talked about these cataclysmic traumatizing events that have happened, right? But then that awakened the force, right? Now, how did the community respond to this cataclysmic traumatizing event, right? And those things that carried us through the darkest times within history, right, I believe can carry us through these darkest times that we are currently in. Because it's in comparison to nothing to what our relatives and ancestors have gone through. Right? And so that is what I mean by this. And I have to plug myself in the work that I do, pay bills, stuff like that. So I'm going to sell out for a little bit right here. So I have trained hundreds, if not thousands of peers throughout the state. And early in recovery, I used to do contract work for a lot of different recovery organizations doing peer support. But I found myself when I would do peer support in my communities that I had to translate the material to make it relevant. This is what it means in our community. This is what they mean by that. This is how this looks when we do this in our community, right? You know what I mean? And so I had spent 11 months writing this manual from scratch. It's called the Native American Peer Recovery Services. And then I got it accredited by Minnesota Certification Board. So that way it's a 46-hour training that took me 11 months to write with the 800 slides. It's 46 training. That when you go through it, you get a certificate, and you could take this certificate to go apply to take the test to become a certified peer support specialist. And all this is talking about everything that I just talked about, how we incorporate these things that have carried our people through these darkest times, and how does that look like for our recovery today, right? How important it is to get an Indian name. How important it is to put your tobacco out. How important it is to have access to know where you can go get an Indian name, right? And so like I said earlier, we don't need anybody to come and save us, right? You know what I mean? We are the people that our ancestors have been waiting for, right? And same when I joined the Governor's Advisory Board, if not me, then who, right? Nobody else is going to be talking about the disparities and the overdose that's happening in my community. If not me, then who? Thinking I don't deserve to be in this space, what can I contribute, right? And I hear the conversations, and they're not talking about the disparities and the death rate of my people, right? And so when we're talking about in our communities, we don't need anybody to save us because everything that we need already exists within our communities. Right? How do I explain this here? So there's all these little ecosystems or pockets of goodness that exist within our community, right? There's all these places where we know if we wanted to go to Sweat Lodge where we could go, right? You know what I mean? And if not, I'm sure you could connect with people. There's already places where you can find these little pockets of culture that exist within the community, right? There's all these little pockets of people that are in recovery that you know that you can go to. There's all these little pockets of people that are playing the moccasin game or getting an Indian name or smudging or going to support groups or maybe even you have where you could get therapy or where you could get all of these things already exist. But how can we create this network and grow it and bring people to it? So there's this talk all this time. So I work with a lot of different tribes. There's this thing called sustainability, right? In terms of administratively, right? Is like in the Western concept of sustainability means resources. How can we keep resources going to this thing to sustain it, right? You know what I mean? And so what I've seen within tribal communities, sustainability means something different. It means that all the work doesn't have to fall on me. It can be a community. And the community is never going to go anywhere. And to me, the community's response to substance use disorder is infinite. Right? You know what I mean? So Tuesday night Wellbriety group, there was all of these elders that started to fucking cook for us on Tuesday night. Right? You know what I mean? And it became this thing of like, okay, I want to cook, because they would see all their nieces, nephews, grandbabies, brothers, sisters showing up to our Tuesday night Wellbriety meeting, and it's just getting big, and it's fucking growing, and whatever like that. And their family members so proud of their relatives, they want to help, right? The community wants to help. And how do we tap into those resources and invite them in, right? All of a sudden, there's elders that wanted to show up and bestow teachings on Tuesday nights. Elders that I didn't even know had these teachings. I'll be like, hey, I want to come talk to your group on Tuesday night. I'm like, all right, cool. We'll give you an hour or whatever. And they talk to us about the sacred teachings of tobacco. They talk to us about the protocols of going to a sweat lodge. They talk to us, start bestowing all of these teachings onto us, right? You know what I mean? And the community's response is all there, right? But how do we invite the community in, right? Because me alone, I am just one ego feather, right? Tying it back to oxytocin. You know what I mean? All right? So, the whole thing about nappers, I don't want to sell out too bad. Okay, yeah, but there is, everything that's in nappers that is quote unquote evidence-based, right, which is the normal PRS training, what is about trauma-informed care. I told you about that. Learning about historical trauma, going forward, whatever like that. Pushing back against exploitation. Teach you about advocacy. That's one key part of being a PRS is advocacy. Advocacy, we've been advocating throughout history, right? Building connection, right, with culture, ceremony, building connections of ecosystems of recovery across the continuum. Being inclusive. This is a big one for me, so I'm going to tell you a quick little story here before I move on, because it's important that I talk about this. I had a friend. She was 17 years old, and I used to pick her up and bring her to Pizza Hut. Every Friday night, we used to go to Pizza Hut after a 12-step group. And all of a sudden, people were like, oh, fucking free pizza? Shit, you know what I mean? So now, you know what I mean? Everybody, if I have to fucking sit through an hour of a meeting just to go to Pizza, I'm down. Right? So now there's all kinds of fucking people, the community members showing up on this to Pizza Hut Friday night, right? And I had a friend that I would pick up. She was 17 years old. And when I would pick her up, she smelled like weed. Now, I am abstinence-based. I come from a 12-step background, even though I am abstinence-based, right? But I knew that she used to be a heroin user. And so when I would pick her up, she would smell like weed, and everybody in the community would bitch about her. How come she gets to come to Pizza Hut? She don't deserve Pizza Hut. She smells like weed. You know what I mean? And talk all this shit about her with me. And I was like, okay, fine. I will pick her up by myself. I won't put other people, you know what I mean, at risk of smelling that shit. Whatever, I'd pick her up. And I'd bring her to Friday night all the time. And same thing. People pushing back on me. Why the fuck you picking her up? Why the fuck you picking her up, right? COVID happened. They shut down all the meetings, right? And she had a warrant and she went to jail. She went to jail for 10 days. And the day she got out of jail, she went back to heroin, overdosed, and died. And fuck, I was so angry at the recovery community at that time, right? Because we were trying to exclude her, right? A system that was built on exploitation, I am still trying to perpetuate it and exclude her from the fucking process. People were trying to exclude her, right? And when she passed on, that pissed me off, and I was angry at the recovery community for a little bit, right? Because we were trying to exclude her from this goodness, right? And like I said, we are all just part of this one big bird, right? You know what I mean? And so I wanted to incorporate her and bring it. It was a big deal. So that's a story I want to talk about, being inclusive in this, right? And how important representation matters. How important it is for me to be on this fucking bullshit board. You know what I mean? This was the first training we did about nappers. Oh, this was a good one too. Now, dun, 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 dun. How do we build this movement going forward? And my only solution to this is working together. Regardless of whether you're fucking Muslim or East African, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're homeless or whether you're housed, whatever it is, the only way I know how to go forward is if we do this shit together, right? So Red Lake has a fucking walleye roundup. It's fucking 4 hours from me. Shit, let's go. You know what I mean? Yeah. Now, Warrior Down Project owes me. You got to show up to our event here, you know what I mean? But the only way we do this shit is together, right? And there's more people that we have when we get together, when we do a smudge walk, or when we do the message we are sending to our people is powerful. Recovery is here. And how can we invite everybody into this movement, right? No matter where they're at and what they're going through, we need to invite everybody in. I remember there was a meeting I took the last time I was in jail, or prior to me going to prison, I took this thing to trial. I took a home invasion to trial, and I beat it. But the guys that showed up and testified against me that day was whatever like that. And I'm fucking chairing this meeting, and I'm in early stage of recovery, and he shows up to the meeting. Now, the old me, right, that been in and out of prison is thinking one thing. But the new me, thinking broader, how can I be inclusive? Right? And it felt so good to me to go up to him after this and say, hey, I'm sorry about the bullshit that I did when I was younger. Right? You know what I mean? And inviting him in despite all the bullshit. Right? And for me, that was powerful. when I apologized to him for the bullshit that I was on, right? Okay, so this isn't so much for you guys, but maybe you guys could take it with you. But establishing partnerships for sustainable change, right? Building meaningful collaborations. What does that mean? Engaging with Native leaders, elders, and community organizers in initiatives. Partnering with organizations for authentic impact, co-creation, not just inclusion. What does that mean? What does co-creation, not just inclusion mean? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Am I just full of shit? Do I got to ask the doctor?
Yeah, let's do that.
There's this saying I love that says either you have a seat at the table or you're on someone's menu. How can we start pulling people a seat at the table and work on this issue together? Not just being, you know what I mean? How can we incorporate them and empower them to talk into this conversation? Because I could tell you right now, when I first got into recovery and I would go to board meetings in Mille Lacs with these eggheads and they're talking about harm reduction and all these different programs, I could tell right away, looking at their program, this shit ain't gonna fucking work. You know what I mean? Me as a community member could see, like, we're not going to come up to you and fucking do it. You know what I mean? And so I remember the first thing I did listening to this is like, people aren't going to participate in this. Well, how can we get them to participate? And I was like, shit, you give out a $50 gift card, you know what I mean? Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right? And so, like, that was me showing up, even though I'm just, at the time, junkie inmate 218769, took one look at their initiative and be like, man, people ain't going to fucking show up for that. Right? I could tell right away looking at it. I wouldn't if I was still using, right? But I said, hey, throw a $50 gift card, I bet you get, you know what I mean? Then boom, okay, yeah, right? So that is co-creation, right? We're working together to solve the issue, right? Working together for a more equitable future, blah, 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 whatever, like that. Community engagement. So this was in Mille Lacs. And this was, the bottom one was a smudge walk. That bottom right one was we participated at our powwow in Mille Lacs. There's a parade that happens Saturday morning, and we created a float. Fucking Randall was there, and he was throwing out ramen noodles, like, you know what I mean? And so we're in this parade, right? You know what I mean? We're talking about recovery, celebrating recovery, handing out fucking ramen noodles, right? You know what I mean? This one up here was that top right one was a 4th of July. We had a cookout, right? Holidays are hard for us, right? Holidays, I don't know about you guys, but as a person in recovery, holidays are hard, right? But when we come together, amazing shit happens. Back to oxytocin. Go, Jason. So, let me see here. There's me. There's me. Yeah. Yeah. But again, thank you for sitting through my little presentation, talking about that we are the seeds that are, you know what I mean? And when we grow and we work together, amazing shit fucking happens, despite historical trauma, despite the shit that our people went through. When we work together, amazing shit happens. Same with like what we're doing up here. Shout out to the Warrior Down Project and their amazing work. You know what I mean? Jason's the boss. He has a bunch of peers under him, but they're the ones that put this event together. And they gave us the swag, gave us free lodging, free food, you know, and put this whole thing together, right? You know what I mean? And that is the power of peers and us with our lived experience hosting together, coming together, right? You know what I mean? And amazing shit happens. So shout out to you guys. Thank you guys for my presentations. All of you, yeah.